Hello, this is Gareth from the iMoot team. It is my great pleasure to welcome Shane Elliott to talk about Report Plugin Primer. So once again, on behalf of the team, thank you for putting this wonderful presentation together and for your time. Away you go, Shane. Thank you.
Thanks, Gareth. It was a very nice voice too. All right, let's get into this. I don't normally apologise at the start of my presentation, so I figure they're bad. You just have to deal with it. But this one was a bit of a rush job, and I haven't actually gone through it, and we'll be doing a bit of switching. So fingers crossed, we should be good. A bit about myself. So I work with Pukunui, and I'm based in Hong Kong. We have offices in KL, where Vinny's from, in Perth and in Sydney. That's about it, really. Day to day, I basically do a lot of business stuff, but at the heart of it, I'm really a programmer, developer type person. Enjoy just being a nerd. So that's about it, really. Report Plugin Primer. So what's the goal? What's the destination? It's basically, I was thinking about this. I thought it's just to have a skeleton structure. Half an hour is not a lot of time to write a full plugin and to go through it in any great detail. And basically just to point you to where there's more information, or to, where you can find things and maybe, give some tips along the way. And I just thought I'd throw in some photos of Disneyland. And let me just say, all my photos I've gratuitously stolen from Google searches. So there's probably copyright issues everywhere here. Moving on, so that's the destination. Where's the bar? So where am I setting this? A working knowledge of PHP. So we'll get a little nerdy at points. In fact, probably a bit more nerdy than I was hoping it would be. But I'm kind of targeting if you have some working programming knowledge and you're a beginner. Yeah, that's right, Trish. I do need to. If you're a beginner with Moodle plugins, and basically if you're someone who just likes to tinker with code, I think that's how most programmers actually start out. Which is kind of how the word Moodle came about too. In case you know the history of the word, it's kind of how people, to Moodle through something, to wander aimlessly. Which is to describe both how the programming style of Moodle started off, but also, how people learn as well. So that's where I'm aiming. I think this has probably ended a bit more on the nerdy side of things, though, but we'll see how we go. So I thought I'd give myself a reason to write a plugin. And so I started doing this. I really haven't put much of this in there. I've really just done a framework. But basically, we have a client right now, and I'm about a week overdue with this. But I'm writing a participant activity report for their course as a course report. So it's loosely based on a real request. The reason I did report is I would say maybe almost a half of our development work is writing reports for people. So Moodle, only comes with these generic reports, and that's all it can really do. It can't meet everyone's reporting needs. Everyone has slightly different requirements. And so at the end of the day, quite often, people will just sketch something, quite often on a napkin, and they'll say, this is what I want to see on a screen. And let me say, most of the time, that's enough. Moodle is very good at recording a lot of information. And so really, it's just about pulling that back out and presenting it in some way that makes sense. And report plugins are reasonably easy to do. As I said, it's just pulling information out and presenting it. So I've kind of given myself a reason to do this. So what's the path? What's the route we're going to take? So I'll do a quick talk about Moodle plugins. And I've basically done it in 5 steps, or should I say I've done it in 4 steps. Step 5 is really just talking through how you can extend this a bit further. And if you're looking at that little picture, you could actually see the route from my work office to Disneyland in Hong Kong. I'm on the opposite side of Hong Kong. So that's the idea. That's where I'm going to go with this. Let's see. And again, if there's any questions, feel free to interrupt me. with interruptions. So quick talk about Moodle plugins. Again, I stole these images. These were from a presentation that Thomas Lazich, he is a school teacher in Perth, Australia. But he, years ago, I would say over 10 years ago, he did this video. You can still find it on YouTube. But I still think it's one of the best descriptions of Moodle, how it's modular. And he described Moodle with Lego bricks. Different colored bricks represent different things. So this is just a couple of screen captures. The idea of plugins, and a lot of people have described this over this iMoot. Just about every second presentation, people are talking about plugins. It's to address the M in Moodle, which stands for modular. So the idea that you can put these pieces together. And really, Moodle, the core of Moodle is some core code with a whole set of standard plugins. But the beauty of it is you can get third-party plugins. You can plug in these pieces of code that extend Moodle out, and it becomes more of a extendable learning platform that you can use. A lot of the times, those plugins are also for integrating to external systems. So that's probably the other half of our development work, is making Moodle talk to some other system. And the way to do that is to write a plugin, and that acts like a little connector between the core code of Moodle and the external system. However, today I'm just going to talk about the report plugins, specifically just going to write a report. But yeah, there's a whole range of different plugins. If you've used Moodle, inevitably you have come in contact with a plugin. Even to log in, they are authentication plugins. So even to put username and password is going through a plugin piece of code. At the very most basic level, they are just pieces of code, and they get put in certain places on the server. That's probably enough. An overview of the plugins. So let's get going. I've put all the code I'm going to use up on GitHub, so you're welcome to grab it. I've put the 4 stages that I'm going to do the code for, each in its own branch. If you're familiar with Git, you can grab the code from there. You can download it, do whatever you like with it. Welcome to use my code, welcome to change it, welcome to abuse it. I don't mind. So let me just get started. So minimal code structure. So I thought stage 1, let's just talk about the very minimum I need to get this working correctly in Moodle. And I decided there's 3 files. So there's, oh, sorry, I should talk about where our report will be located. So in the code base from Moodle, it's going to be stored in the report subdirectory. And I've created a report called activity because it's a participant activity. May not be the best name in hindsight. So that's where the code will be stored in that directory. I've written there the Frankenstyle name is report_activity. Frankenstyle. That was a word that came by one of the Moodle developers years ago, and it's like a convention of naming the plugins. And so really it's the plugin type, report, _ the name of the plugin, activity in this case. So all the plugins have a Frankenstyle name. And that's quite important actually when you're coding, because a lot of things run off that. And Moodle actually expects you to state it in certain places. So if you were writing an authentication plugin, so there's email authentication, that's actually auth, AUTH _ email is the thanks, Gareth. There's probably going to be a lot of those links I haven't put up here, so you're welcome to paste them as you go. So Frankenstyle naming, even the word Frankenstyle, there's a bit of a history behind that as well. So let me get going. So there's 3 files we need to make this happen. Version.php is a version file. Every plugin is required to have a version file, and I'll show you what's in that in a minute. There's going to be off report activity, lang directory, en for English, and a file, a PHP file. Again, that's named after the Frankenstyle name, and it has to be named that for this plugin. And that's where the language strings are stored, and I'll show you them. And then I've done an index file, so that's basically a file just to do something. It's not absolutely required, but it's kind of useless if we're not displaying something on the screen. So to show you what's in those 3 files, I've done a screen capture here. I think it was easier than screen sharing all my nerdy screens that are everywhere. So this is the version file. I hope you can see that. So I'm going to talk through just a few things about this. At the top of each of these files, it's very common information at the top there. This is comment code to the top, whatever that is, about 10 or 11 lines. This is written in PHP docs format. So there is a standard way to write comments. And so it's kind of required in Moodle that you should be writing this at the top. And it's a way for you, with PHP docs, you can search through for things as well. It helps with the documentation of the code. And so you'll see just about every file in Moodle will have this at the top. So information about the package, sub-package, copyright, author, license. There's other information you can put in there. Now in the version file, there's those 4 lines that say plugin and they start off. Yeah, I guess they're all important. The first one, the version, is just a 10-digit number. I got that right? Yep, 10-digit number. The first 8 digits are just a date, so year, month, day, and the last 2 are really just a counter. And so that's how Moodle manages the versions. So Moodle itself, the core version of Moodle, has its own number, but each plugin has its own version number as well. And that way, when you do upgrades, you can just increase that. It should be an ever-increasing number. So obviously, I dated this the 1st of May this year with 0 on the counter. And that will change as I go through these different stages as well, because I need to trigger upgrades. The requires is actually the Moodle version that is required for this to run. I didn't really check that, 20th November last year, so that will be 3.2. So that's the version of Moodle. The component, so this is where you need to put in the Franken-style name. So Moodle, it looks for that. And the maturity is not required, but I put it in there, maturity beta, just to say that I'm developing this code. If you're on a production site, you wouldn't be able to install this. It would give you a warning, say this is not stable code. But basically, once you'd written the plugin, I would change that to maturity_stable to say it's ready to be shared. And it's been stable, it's tested and so on. So that's the version file. Once it's written, there's not often you come back to it except to trigger the version number. So there's various reasons you might want to trigger an upgrade when you write a plugin, and we'll get to that. So what all I've done is I've triggered the last number. The 0 just goes to a 1, 2, 3. It's just a counter. And that's enough for Moodle to know there's a new version, and it needs to do its own internal updates. So moving on, the second file, this was the language file. Not much in there, so the top section is pretty standard. But the strings, so these, when I say string, I realize that's actually a nerdy word. It's like a phrase, a word or a phrase that Moodle needs to be displayed on the screen. So Moodle internally in the code uses where you can see the word plugin name. That's what Moodle uses in its code. And what it needs is something to display for you on the screen. And so that's what this is translating out to. So this is how Moodle manages all of the language packs and how you can customize language as well. So the idea is each plugin defines its own language strings, what it uses internally. But once they're defined in this way, then you can go to the customized language interface in Moodle, and you can change it for any plugin. So you can put your own words in there. So just to get us going, you basically just need a plugin name. That's enough to get you going. And my index file is a bit more complicated, but don't be too scared by it. So that's it completely there. So the things to note, the first line of code is this one here, the require line. That's requiring the Moodle config file, which is back at about 2 directories. So every plugin in Moodle, or every page that displays something on the screen, should be requiring that that file, the config, and that loads up all the Moodle libraries that it needs to work. And makes a lot of things available, so all the functions and so on that are available as part of the APIs. The next section is just some things I need Now, the context I will talk about next, so don't worry about that for now. Suffice to say, there is these different contexts in Moodle, and your plugin will belong into one of them. To get us going, I'll use the system context, but I'm going to change that later to a course context. The URL, yeah, it's just setting up a URL in Moodle. There's actually a class. It's slightly better to use than just a string. Yeah, so that's just a location of this file. So suffice to say that. There's the plugin name. So this is me getting the plugin name. So there's two ways to do this. In this one, I've used a lang string, so it's an object for those of you who know about it. So this is where I've said require the name, the plugin name, and get it from the report _ activity. So get it from this plugin. You can also get strings that are from the core Moodle or even from other plugins, so you can get them ready to be used. So I've basically loaded up the words course activity, and they're stored in this variable here. And the reason I've done that is because down here I've needed it a couple of times, so I've loaded it up. Now these page settings, without going into detail of what each one does, let's just say they're required to get the page. It's like the setup of the page. So each page of Moodle needs some basic setup to get it all going. It allows Moodle to give you, make the headers work and the footers work and so on. The layout, for instance, tells it what to do with blocks. So the themes can control what a report layout looks like. So I'm just saying that my plugin is a report plugin. I want to use the report layout. However, that may be defined. And obviously, Moodle has a default layout, but themes can overwrite that. And the title, so that's what it will display, in the browser top section. And really, this section under here, this is actually what is doing the page, the output to the page. Outputs, so anything in uppercase in Moodle, these variables are global variables. Moodle will define these for you. So output header really it defines the whole header section of Moodle for you. So it will output all the, we'll put out the HTML5 document information to the browser that it needs. It will load up all the JavaScript libraries, the CSS files, and so on. So it's quite easy, actually, to get all that running. I've just echoed a single line after it, say, do something in here. And afterwards, the footer will close off things. So it does all the closing off, puts in the footer that might come with your theme, whatever it is, and close that off. So just to show you what that looks like, I actually have this loaded already. Just sharing my screen out. Hopefully that's coming through. So just on my laptop, actually. So that's up the top, you can see my basic URL to my Moodle site. And at the moment, there's no other way to get here. But there you go. So that piece of code with the 3 lines, echo the output header, has done all that header information and given me like the site admin menu. You can see there, all of that's loaded up with a line that says do something in here. And if I scroll down, you see the footer section is all there for me. So reasonably easy to get something up on the screen. So that's stage 1. Pause that screen sharing, and I'll get back to my document here. All right, so moving on. Access. So behind the scenes, I'm actually loading up the next stage of code into my demo site. So in this stage, I thought I'd just talk about capabilities. So basically securing the page and adding a capability check and a note about the contexts. So let's look at what order I put these in. Right. So this file exists in, oops, I'll go back one. So I've got a new file here, and it's in a directory called DB, and this was originally for database, and a lot of stuff goes in there. But one of these is the access files, access.php. So, and in there you define capabilities. Oops, moving on. Here we go. So this is the file that's in there. So all the header section as usual. And what it's looking for, Moodle will look for a capabilities array. So this is how it's set. So those of you who are Moodle admins would have seen this if you've gone and defined roles or played with the roles that are in Moodle. By the way, which I don't recommend unless you really know your way around it. You can really screw up the site. But this is where they're defined as part of the plugin structure. So they're in the code. So I've got a new capability called report activity view. So basically to view this report. I've put a risk in here. So when you've gone and if you've gone into the admin interface and looked at it, you would have seen against the capabilities, there's different risks and they come with little icons, spam risks and so on. Cool. Thank you, Gareth. I'm loving the fact that you're here doing this. And some other information, it's at the course level. The archetypes are really just saying for the manager archetype and the editing teacher, I'm going to automatically allow anyone with those associated roles to be allowed to view this report. And obviously you could do this with students and course creators and all the other default roles that are in Moodle. So basically I'm just defining one new capability. And what I've done is, in my index file, I've now just changed a couple of things around. So I've probably done this in the wrong order. I've changed, let me just skip that. There's a new line here that says require capability. So what that is saying is that Moodle will now do a security check. When you load up this page, it will say, okay, are you logged in? Even if you're not, you'll have a guest role in Moodle, but it says the current user must have that capability. It must be allowed in this context, in the course context. And if you don't, it'll just say, throw a message up on the screen saying you are not allowed to view this page at this time, or a similar message to that. So that's basically securing this page now, so that not just anyone on the web can come and see it. And let me say I'm simplifying this somewhat. There are some other ways you can do this. You can require logins, and there's a few other checks you could do on the way. But that's probably the simplest way to secure this page. Now, just note above, I've also added a couple of extra lines here. So one is to require a parameter. So I'm now expecting when you go to the page, there'll be a parameter in the URL that has ID written against it. And that's the course ID, because this is a course report. And you'll see here, I've also changed the context, so to a course context. Now, I said I'll describe this just a little bit more. Actually aware I'm running behind time now. But in Moodle, there are a whole lot of context. So essentially, there's a site context, course categories, courses, activities, blocks, user context, and there's a kind of front page context. And so everything you do in Moodle is based around those contexts. You're in one of those at any point in time. And so you can define capabilities based on that. There's actually a lot of things that work against the context, like the filters, for instance, can be turned on and off at the different context levels. Permissions get put through. So, if you're in a course context, you get permissions from a role you might have higher up. So you might be a manager of a course category above that course, and you'll inherit permissions through. So my report is a course report. So basically it exists in this course context. So I basically want to know someone has this capability, wherever it is, in this context, that within this course. So it means course by course, I can allow someone to view this. And essentially, the way I've defined that capability, it means that someone has the role of a teacher, they will automatically get the capability to view this report. But apart from that, nothing else much has changed. So let me, I think I've got another. Oh, yes. And just to talk about this, I've also created a file, a lib file in my plugin. This was to give me some navigation to get to the report. Now, just to make a point here, there's two ways to do this because there's two different types of reports. So one is that you can create a settings file, and that you probably will do this anyway, ultimately. That can define a link that's part of the site administration, and it can also define settings, global settings for this plugin. But also in your lib file, which stands for library, you can put standard functions. So there's a function name here. Actually, this line is redundant. I don't know why I put it in there. But this is actually saying, if you've got this capability, then it's going to create a link that's going to be part of the report navigation that's in your course settings. So I'll show you where that exists. For me, I can never remember all those settings. I actually go and grab it from another plugin. So in fact, I imagine most developers just do it that way, copy and paste. But essentially, that's the way I'm going to get a link. So I'll show you that now. I'll get back to that screen sharing. Right, so I'm back here. So actually, let me just, jump back into my, so this is the course, my test course A. So it's a pretty empty course, but in my, so we're using the Boost theme. But if I click on more, I hope I haven't been logged out in the meantime. We're running slow on my laptop. I'm probably doing too much with all this. That's right, Gareth. Yeah, copy and paste is your friend. I use VI, so I use the buffers quite a lot actually. So here we go, and what you'll see here in reports. So these are the standard Moodle reports, but there's one now called course activity based on my plugin name that I've used. So if I click on that, there you go, and you'll see the URL at the top now has an ID number against it. So part of this, the code that was in my library, my lib file, says to pass the course ID through. So still the same, except I've got a capability check in there. So if I wasn't logged in, there'd be an error message. Cool, yeah, Gareth, there's a lot of ways to do it. As I said, I'm really simplifying this down, believe it or not, but there's a lot of ways you can extend the navigation and so on. So going to pause that, and I'll get through these last two stages as quick as I can. Where am I? So my stage 3, rendering. This isn't absolutely necessary, but you'll probably get there if you. I thought I might as well put it in because it makes it. Yeah, just for interest. So I've added a new class called a renderer. So every plugin can define its own renderers. What a renderer is just a piece of code that puts together the HTML and displays it onto your screen for you. You know, so it can control the layout somewhat within the plugin. Why that is really good to use a renderer is that the themes can overwrite the renderers. So if someone, you know, if I write these plugins and give it to you, you'll have your own theme, or you have a theme designer or someone who can do it. They can then go, wow, I don't like the renderer that came with the plugin, but I can overwrite it. So it's a good way to get the things displayed on your screen. Now, just to make a point, Moodle is already using a default renderer anyway, but if you're using your own plugin renderers, it's easier for the themes to overwrite them. So that's basically added one extra file here. Now, anything in the classes subdirectory is Moodle will try to auto-load it. So there's some files it knows about. One called renderer.php, and it will automatically load it up for you. So there's nothing more to be done than to write the code in there. So I'll just show you that. So that's my renderer. So yeah, blah, blah, blah information at the top as usual. I've got a new class. So again, if you're in PHP, you'll need to know about object-oriented programming. Yeah. So I've extended a base class. Yeah, you're right, Gareth. That's pretty heavy reading, that one, automatic class loading. I didn't go into namespaces. I thought that's just way too much. But there's a plugin base class, and I've just extended it. So that base class has a lot in it already. It has header functions and footer functions and all sorts of things. All I've done is added one little method in there, and I did it this way because I thought I'd show there's also an HTML writer. It's a helper class that's in Moodle, and it has a whole lot of cool little methods that are in it. So this is about writing a tag, so an H2 tag. There is another way to do that. Also a P tag. And so I've just said my little paragraph tag is going to say we really should do something in here. And I've given a class of bg-info, so it's like a bootstrap class that should give it a blue background. And that is essentially it for that one. I don't think I've Oh, yes. And so going to my index file, I've upgraded that again. So coming down to here, this is where the changes are. Now I've gone and loaded up that renderer. So I say to my code, so as I've gone through these page settings, saying, hey, my plugin has its own renderer, just load it up for me. And what I've done here, I've echoed the header from that renderer, my extra method I've written, dummy text, and the footer. So it's all coming from the base class renderer, or my overwritten one. And to show you what that looks like, let's resume the screen sharing again. Hope that's loaded up for you. And I might simply just do a refresh. So I've loaded up the code in the background. At this point, I hope I haven't made any bugs in my code, just to make sure this works. My poor laptop is really struggling with this big blue button and screen sharing and trying to load up having a server run on it. Yeah, so there we go. So I had the H2 header, page header, and that's my little paragraph tag that was written there. So now I'm starting to control the look of the output. I can do a bit more with it. So moving on, I know it's not very interesting yet. So just freezing that. Let me get on to stage 4, which is just adding some content. So basically, now I've got that up, and this is how I would normally go about writing a plugin, is I'd get the basic framework up. So there's something displaying on screen, reasonably secure. I've got a navigation method to get there. And then I would actually start putting what I'm writing the plugin for, which is adding some content. Now, I've just made some points here. I've added my content in. I put it in 2 areas. So one is in local lib.php, not the lib file. There's a reason for this. The lib file is automatically loaded by Moodle. Even if someone's not reading your plugin, Moodle still loads up that library file every time you load up a page in Moodle, because it has to check for certain functions in it, for example, to do with navigation. So even when I'm on my course page, the lib file from my plugin is loaded to give me that navigation link. So, and there's a lot of extra functions that can go in there. So anything that is specifically only for your plugin, by convention, we put into a local lib, and you just load that up as you need it. So it's a good way to minimize the code and the work Moodle has to do behind the scenes. I can't tell you how many times I've come across third-party plugins with someone who hasn't really got their head around it, and they've loaded up everything within that lib.php. And that just slows down all the other pages. So it's not being very useful. So I've actually just done one function in the local lib, and then I've done a massive change in the renderer. I've used a whole lot of things. I'm not going to go through that because there's so much in there, but you could download the code and look. So very briefly, so there's my content. So this is the local lib. I've just added a function in here. By convention, all the functions we add should start with our Frankenstyle name. That's just to keep the names unique. So report_activity. And so on. So all I've done here, I've got users for the course. So the course ID is passed through. I've used Moodle's core functions. So get enrolled users. So there's a function that will give me all the participants for a particular course in that course context. And then I also decided I want to know every user who's in every group that might be defined in that course. So get all the groups and cycle through the groups and get the group members. Now for this plugin I'm writing for a client, there'll be a whole lot of database queries I'll need to do as well because they need extra information. I just thought I noted down to put a word of advice about database queries. If you are writing your own code, ideally you want to minimize the number of database queries. Again, one of the places people get caught out is they'll do a loop over things. So they'll use a PHP loop, and then for every loop they'll run a database query. Ideally, you want to do the queries outside of the loops. Now, sometimes it's unavoidable, but as much as you can, you need to, even if it's a huge query, it's better to do that a one-off and get that information into your code first of all, and then manage it, cycle through, get out what you need from that. I also can't. I haven't gone into. I know Gareth just put the link there. I actually haven't done any of the DB, the database API. I deliberately left that, but it is you need to get your head around it to write a good plugin. But I just thought I'd use the API functions in Moodle for this. And the second part. Oh yes. So hang on. I'm just going to jump ahead a slide. Oh, going to go back a slide. I haven't shown my renderer file, but what's happened in there, I actually have defined a renderer function that says render course participants. And that one method actually does its own header, will do the footer. It grabs all the information that comes from that local lib function, and it meshes it. So it creates tags, div tags. It puts it into an HTML table, which would be something, if you want to get the code, is interesting to look at, how it loads up tables. And that way Moodle can manage the layout of it. It's already quite well defined, the HTML tables. And also what I've done in here, and this is not strictly, I shouldn't have done this, but I've used the Bootstrap classes to give me some collapsible areas. So I will show you what that does. I'm just checking I've got this upgraded. Get the screen sharing happening again. There we go. And let me load up this page again, and you'll see it will look different, not too bad. So this, my course, just to let you know, I have about 20 users in there, and I've put them into 3 groups. So those functions that you just saw have actually done this, and the renderer has then defined this page. And using the Bootstrap classes, these are all basically expandable, I don't know what they're called, collapsible something or others they call them. And you can see the HTML table. I've just defined 2 columns in the table. Yeah, accordion, there we go, that's it, thank you. So I'm just displaying the name. I made that a link to go off to the user's profile and their email address. And then the groups is the same. So it's just seeing who's in the groups. So just to separate the pieces out for you, so that's the local lib is getting the information that I need, either out of the Moodle's API functions or database queries. The renderer is the one that's putting it all onto screen, and part of the renderer is I've loaded up Bootstrap classes because I'm using the Boost theme. I know I've got the Bootstrap classes and JavaScript available to me, so I've done that. And my final report's going to be a lot more involved. There'll be little forms up here to say date ranges and so on, and I'll pass that back through. And this will be laid out slightly differently. But this was just an example of what you can get on the screen reasonably quickly. So that code, I'll pause that again. So that code is all available to you. That's all at GitHub, as I said at the start. Final couple of slides. Is this one here is just to say stage 5 was just further extensions and things there was no time to go through. I'm already running over time, so I'm aware. But these are different file areas. So database tables, there'll be an install file. Usually Moodle's got an XML DB editor. So in the site administration under developer, there's an XML DB editor. And so for any plugin, yeah, Gareth, I'll get it's on my first slide, so I'll get it back for you. So you can actually define database tables, and it will lead you through, and it will make sure they're defined in the right way for Moodle. So that's quite a handy little tool written by Elliott, who's in Spain. Web services, so you can define your own web services per plugin. So that'll be in db/services.php. So that's REST services, SOAP services, all of that. So for external systems to connect to your plugin and get certain information out. You can do scheduled tasks. So these are things that run in the background. So for instance, like the forums, we'll send out, email out forum posts. That's all part of a scheduled task. And as an administrator, you would have noticed there's a scheduled task site admin link, and you can even define how often each task runs. You can disable it. So, but each plugin can define its own tasks internally. Event handlers, so how Moodle can deal with events that happen. So when you post to a forum, as an example, an event is thrown in Moodle, and other plugins can grab that event and do something with the information. So we've often done this with plugins where we need to capture every time someone completes a course or completes a certain activity. We've written a local plugin, but it's captured that event and it will send off an email to someone. So you can do a lot with the event handlers. Backup and restore, if this was a proper plugin, the report's not too bad. It doesn't really need any backup restore code. But if it's something that contains user information and would need to go with a course backup, this is where you define it. Testing, so again, a fully developed plugin should have its own unit testing and BHAT testing. So it's just to test, provide internal testing to secure your code. There's moustache templates, so that's more to do with the rendering out. Moodle, you don't necessarily have to use those, but they have some advantages. I think for a report, it's not a lot from my point of view. There's messaging systems, so that's how Moodle can send out messages. So again, the forum's a good example. When it sends out a post from a forum, it's actually sent out as a message, and each message goes to a messaging system. So Moodle can internally deal with that. And there's actually further extensions than that. I'm just grabbing some of them to let you know there's a lot you can do with these. The main point is there are defined files and areas in Moodle where you should define these things. Which I'm just ending right on time. Just in summary, so it's wrong order. Let me just say there's a couple of things here. For more information, I'll go to docs.moodle.org/dev. So you can see Gareth has been posting some links in there. There's a wealth of information in there on the APIs. But my biggest piece of advice is actually just look at the standard plugins that are in Moodle, or look at a plugin someone else has written. Because of the coding guidelines in Moodle, it actually makes the plugins quite easy to read. And once you get your head around it, you can kind of understand the files quite well. And no harm in just copying and pasting someone else's work and editing for your own purposes. So so I'll leave it there. And yeah, I might finish because I went a bit over time. So I'll leave it there. Is there any questions? And I'll get that first slide up second slide up. Third slide up. Oh, hang on, I missed it, sorry. No, can't find my code. Where is it? There it is. So there's the GitHub link if you want the code. Yeah, so as Gareth said, yeah, all code. If it's derivative code of Moodle, it's got to be GPL'd, so it's open source. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to share it, but thanks, Trish. Yeah, that's the link.
Okay, Shane, thank you. So we're just waiting for our questions. Thank you, Tom. There's loads of stuff in there, stuff I didn't know. Always really great to see how another developer does things, learns things. There's stuff I've learned. I think, oh, crumbs, I haven't done that ever. I need to change my plugins. So on behalf of myself and everybody here, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation.
Cool, thanks, Gareth. It does raise a point just to finish on that. It's an amazing thing about an open source community like Moodle, and there's a lot of them out there, is putting your code out there, is that people learn off you and you learn off them, and even people editing your code. So you've got to be somewhat, put your ego aside, don't you? And then, because everyone's looking at your code and they suggest better ways to do it. But it's a good process. It really tightens you up and you learn a lot. It's crowdsourcing knowledge. Even if you get into coding, I do suggest, if you can, it's frustrating, but it really does harden you up as a programmer. So it's, yeah. Cool. Well, thanks everybody. If there's no questions, post it. I don't even check my course. I'm sure there's a forum in there. Yeah. Mute my mic and yeah. Thanks all.